Hi, I'm Marguerite from MoveToTacoma.com, and I'm here today with my niece, who is also a real estate agent, who is also a homeowner.
Yeah, I love that addition to the introduction now.
Yes. So, I bought my first house when I was 25, which is pretty young. And you bought your house
when I was 30.
30. So pretty young, but something that, there's all these stats about how women are buying, single women are buying homes, people are buying homes younger. And I wanted to talk today about what has that been like for you? What do you wish you'd known? And how can we help other people who are wanting to buy their first house here in Tacoma? What do they need to know to be ready?
First off, it's amazing. And I'm not exaggerating about that. So I feel like, especially because I had been a realtor, I don't even know how long at that point, 4 or 5 years. And I felt this pressure, which I'm sure, not just being a realtor, I'm sure other people feel that pressure too. When your late 20s, I need to buy something. But luckily, I had a really sweet deal when I rented, so it kind of forced me to wait because I'm I'm never going to pay this low on anything ever again, and I'm in a nice area. So that being said, looking back, I'm really glad for me that I waited, because the house I would have bought when it first occurred to me that I wanted to buy, and I could actually buy, is way different than the house I ended up in.
Because you took the time to really look and think about it. And I think this is so important for people to know as far as timing. I think a lot of real estate agents will kind of put out there that now is the time, you have to buy now. And I think especially on your first house, the timing of your life is so important for when you buy. So how did you know the timing was right for you to settle down and buy a house instead of being more fluid and being able to rent and move?
Well, for me personally, my personality type, I'm very fiscally conservative. So even though I was financially in a position where I could buy, I was really scared. And I mean, I'm a realtor. I'm in houses all the time. I'm helping people all the time. And it was still such a huge decision for me. But I was in that situation where my landlord was I'm going to sell this house.
Yeah.
So, and that was the push I needed, because even when I found that news out, I'm maybe I want to rent for a couple more years. I'm why? No, rent's high. I'm not going to have this sweet deal anymore. So that is what gave me the shove, the push to spread my wings and fly into homeownership.
But outside looking in, I would say you were in a career that you'd been in for a few years. You knew how much money you made, and you felt like you were going to keep making that much money. So that means you knew what you could afford going forward. You were planning to stay in Tacoma for at least 5 years, right? You were solid for yourself. And I think, maybe the additional consideration that a person might have is if they're in a relationship. So you were in a relationship. You are in a relationship. You're still in a relationship.
Maybe.
But you made the decision to buy the house on your own. So your partner lives with you, and I assume shares housing costs, but that is your house. And what is your advice for other women who are in their late 20s or early 30s who are buying a house with a partner? How do you kind of assess how to manage that?
Yeah, and everyone does it differently. So I've had couples who are fairly new, and they decide to go full in, which for me, fiscally conservative, also conservative in that aspect. So I've had people who just get approved with one person because someone has better credit, and it actually hurts their buying power to try to buy it together. But I've had couples who one of them is on the loan, but they're both on the title.
Right.
So I think you have to look at your situation and evaluate. I'm going to say your joke because I thought it was funny, but we tell people hey, how long are you planning to stay in this house? At least 3 years, at least 5 years. Yeah, same thing as the couple. What do you see your future with that person looking like? And are you ready to commit to be on title with that person? Or do you want it a little more fluid? You could even have conversations hey, for now, I'm buying this on my own, but maybe we reevaluate if we're still together in a couple of years. I'm open to that. Or you say, I'm not open to that, so let's get you a rental to own if you
And this is just the real talk of in the olden days, it was you would date someone, and then you would marry them, and then you would move in and buy a home together, and then you would have babies. And nothing happens in that order anymore. And to really assess this relationship the kind of relationship where if it dissolves, I want to be dealing with this person as we negotiate what portion of the equity in this house they get. Like, all of that is going to be decided by lawyers if you don't have a written agreement, if you don't have a plan in place. You know, I think is this a person that I want to have these hard discussions with when we're breaking up?
Yeah. And I would say, like you said, like in the olden days, it was assumed. But you know what? A lot of people assume a lot of stuff still.
It's true.
So I would say, too, just this is an agent advice, just a human-to-human advice, like, really think about what's best for you when you're buying your house. Like, for me, it was really important to own my own house.
Right.
And I'm open to buying a house later on with somebody else, or if somebody wants to own a rental together, because that's a little less pressure from my perspective. But it was really important to me. Like, my first house, I really want it to be my house.
You know, one thing that I'm considering listening to you is when I bought my first house, I was married and we bought it together, and we divorced while we still owned that house. And then there's this whole situation of, in order to get, I did not keep the house. He kept the house, and then I was bought out of my share of the equity. But then you have to do this whole thing where, like, you refinance. That person has to be able to qualify for the loan of the house on their own. They have to make payments to you. It's a lot of complexity, right? Whereas this time around, you know, I bought a house with my partner, and instead of doing it that way, like, he bought the house, we have a written agreement about the equity, and someday I might buy my own house and we'll have a separate written agreement. Like, there are so many ways that you can arrange this with your partner, and I think that's where talking to a good real estate agent who has experience with that, talking to a lawyer, it is worth a couple hours of a lawyer's time to sit down and talk about, how do I protect my interests in this situation in a way that is fair to my partner. I think these are things that maybe our grandparents didn't have to worry about when they bought a house, but let's face it, our grandmommies didn't have bank accounts, so like, things are different now.
Yeah, I like to always put out there too, like, what is normal, you know? Because I think there is a pressure of, like, and assumptions, like, you're going to buy it together and, like, you're going to do things this one way, and that's not true. There's lots of different options. And
then there's also reality, which is, you know, the housing market is becoming less affordable, especially for young people. There's no young person that doesn't know that it's harder to buy a house now than when our parents bought and then when our grandparents bought. And so you might be needing to buy a house with a person that you're not totally sure about on the 5-year plan. Well, that's where, like, written agreements come in, and like having an idea of what is your exit plan, not just your purchase plan.
I love the idea of, like, different relationships, people buying houses together too. Like, I've had mother-daughter buy houses together. Like, I love,
sisters,
all the different options.
BFFs.
Long-term BFFs.
Long-term BFFs.
So talking about what I thought home ownership would be like, or what I envisioned myself buying when I went into buying a house versus what I ended up in. I'm a realtor, and I had been a realtor for like 5 years when I bought my house. And one of the pieces of advice I give people, because sometimes people come in and they're like, we know exactly what we want.
Yeah.
Be open-minded.
Yeah. Especially the first time around.
Yeah, and don't box yourself in, because even as someone who's been in so many homes when I bought my house, it was not love at first sight. It was not. And I thought I would have, like, I'm a very intuitive person. I like to feel the magic, the spark when I go into houses. There was no spark. I had a random agent, actually, who I'd offered on one of his listings and lost and cried. I was devastated. Cash buyer beat me out. And it was like $100,000 more than the house I ended up in, which is good. I got a cheaper house. But he was like, you should go look at this one. And he sent it to me. And I was like, it's just smaller than I want. It only has one bathroom. The bathroom debacle. We all want more than one bathroom, okay? But I was like, okay, I'll look at it. And I went in, and I was like, and it was ugly on the outside. It was like this ugly cream color. It was a Rambler, craftsman, I want something cute. And I was like, this is not cute. But I went in, and it was a functional layout. And I'm like, okay, you know what?
It was updated.
The inside. Yeah. Don't judge a book by its cover, because the outside, and they didn't have any interior photos when they listed it, which was weird. So I didn't know what I was getting into. So on the outside, it's just ugly as hell. And then I get in, and it's all updated and modern, and the kitchen was great. It was smaller than I wanted, but I was like, you know what? It's really in the budget, which was important to me as someone who's financially conservative. It was in an area I wanted to be in, And I went for it, and the inspection went really well, and I put that money into beautifying the outside, and now I love it. Like, I love my house.
I can't imagine you living anywhere else.
Yeah, I love my house, and I'm really glad I ended up, I'm glad I ended up in the budget I ended up in, because you can't, people say they don't want to be house poor, and for me, that was really important to have that flexibility. And even with my job being self-employed, like, I didn't want to feel beholden to spending so much monthly on my mortgage. So no regrets.
Well, that gives, I think, a lot of folks a lot of things to think about as they begin their journey of buying a house the first time.
And don't rush yourself.
Don't rush yourself. Take your time. You got your whole life ahead of you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your homeownership journey with us, Keryn.
Yeah, I actually hadn't had a chance to talk about my homeownership journey, so it was good.
Move to Tacoma.com.